September 29th, 1833. The royal palace of Madrid is cloaked in an eerie stillness. The usual buzz of royal activity has vanished. Inside the grand yet gloomy bedchamber, a 48-year-old man lies dying, his body wrecked by disease. He's moaning in agony, his skin covered in ulcerated wounds. Doctors rush in and out, powerless to stop the decay. That man is King Ferdinand VII of Spain. The cause of death? Syphilis. The result of a lifetime spent chasing pleasure with no boundaries. This was no ordinary king. Ferdinand styled himself as the guardian of Catholic virtue, the defender of Spain's moral traditions. But behind the throne, behind the crown, he was something far more sinister, a predator in royal robes. And now, the irony of it all. The man who once enforced morality with an iron fist is dying a death marked by filth, pain, and shame. But how did it come to this? How did Ferdinand become one of the most perverse, hated monarchs in Spain's long history? To understand that, we need to go back to the very beginning. Spain, at that time, still clung to its status as a major European power. His parents, Charles IV and Maria Luisa of Parma, ruled from a palace rife with corruption. For Ferdinand, childhood wasn't filled with royal elegance, it was filled with scandal, deceit, and sexual politics. His mother, Queen Maria Luisa, was infamous for her affairs, especially with Manuel Godoy, a man who used his influence over the queen to effectively run the country. Ferdinand grew up in that toxic world. No role models, no moral compass, just courtly manipulation and indulgence. Even as a child, disturbing signs were there. At 10 years old, Ferdinand was already showing signs of cruelty. He tortured animals, humiliated palace servants for fun. The people charged with educating him tried to intervene, but each time they raised concerns, they were quickly dismissed. The palace didn't just tolerate his behavior, it enabled it. His education was a joke. Unlike other European princes receiving classical training, Ferdinand rejected anything intellectual. He hated books, ignored his tutors, and mocked discussions of statecraft. His main hobby, drilling peepholes into the palace walls so he could spy on private moments between his courtiers. In 1802, at age 18, Ferdinand married his cousin, Maria Antonia of Naples. This union was supposed to help civilize him. It didn't. Behind closed doors, Ferdinand became a tyrant. Private court documents describe how he subjected Maria Antonia, an intelligent and religious young woman, to degrading and violent acts. The marriage broke her. She withdrew into isolation, trying to avoid him altogether. And it only got worse. Ferdinand realized that his status gave him power, especially over women. He began blackmailing ladies of the court. If they refused him, he threatened to destroy their families' reputations. He specifically targeted married women, taking pride in humiliating their husbands through forced affairs. Many noblemen knew what was happening and stayed silent, sacrificing their wives to stay in the king's good graces. Then, in 1806, Maria Antonia died at just 21 years old. Officially, the cause was tuberculosis. Unofficially, rumors swirled had she been poisoned, or had her spirit simply been crushed beyond repair. Ferdinand didn't grieve. He reportedly said her death freed him to pursue more interesting pleasures. In 1808, Spain was plunged into chaos. Napoleon invaded. The Spanish people prepared to resist. And Ferdinand? He saw an opportunity. During the uprising known as the Mutiny of Aranjuez, his father, Charles IV, was forced to abdicate. But instead of rallying the country, Ferdinand reached out to Napoleon in secret. He offered to betray his own nation, asking only for personal security and recognition in return. At the infamous Bayonne meeting, Ferdinand groveled before the French emperor. Witnesses described him as pathetic, offering anything to keep his privileges. Napoleon, who had dealt with plenty of spineless royals, was still stunned by Ferdinand's willingness to sell out everything and everyone. What followed was even more disgraceful. Exiled to the castle of Valenciennes in France, Ferdinand lived in luxury on Napoleon's dime. No plans for resistance. No care for the people suffering under occupation. Instead, he hosted wild parties, corrupted French servants, and contracted his first sexually transmitted infection from a local prostitute. French spies intercepted his letters. They were filled with demands for women and alcohol, proof that Spain's supposed king in exile cared more about debauchery than deliverance. In 1814, he returned to Spain, and it should have been a fresh start. Instead, it was the beginning of a nightmare. His first order of business: restore the Inquisition, but not out of religious fervor. Ferdinand used the institution to blackmail families. Women accused of heresy were offered a deal: sleep with the king, and their sins would be forgiven. Then came his second marriage in 1816 to Isabella of Braganza, a 19-year-old Portuguese princess. Her family essentially sold her off in a political deal. Ferdinand, now 32 and completely consumed by his own depravity, abused Isabella even more brutally than his first wife. Behind palace walls, the court was rotten to the core. Ferdinand created a twisted system of favors rewarding ministers and officials not based on merit, but based on the beauty of their wives and daughters. Want a promotion? Let the king sleep with your wife. He even maintained an unofficial harem, made up of women who held formal palace titles but were actually just there to please the king. What happened behind those walls was nothing short of horrific. Secret court papers uncovered much later describe scenes of ritual humiliation. He forced women into degrading acts while courtiers watched. He turned abuse into theater. It wasn't about lust, it was about control. In 1818, tragedy struck again. Isabella of Braganza died. She was only 21. The official cause? Unclear. Doctors reported severe physical trauma and deep depression. Her confessor later revealed that she longed for death, saying it was her only escape. Ferdinand's reaction? Cold indifference. He remarried within months. His third wife, Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, was just 20 years old. She died after only 2 years with him, yet again, under suspicious circumstances. By now, whispers were growing louder. Was the king killing his wives through psychological and physical torture? By the time the 1820s rolled around, Ferdinand had sunk into the depths of depravity. He wasn't just a morally corrupt monarch, he had become something far darker. His palace was now a house of horror, and his appetite for pleasure had reached terrifying extremes. He maintained dozens of mistresses at once. Some were nobility, others were servants. But shockingly, many were nuns, women he coerced into breaking their sacred vows through threats and political pressure. He even blackmailed church officials into handing over young novices, turning convents into his personal hunting grounds. And the king had a very specific obsession: virgins. He would pay generous rewards for those who brought him young, untouched girls. Word spread across Spain: if your family was starving, if you had no future, there was always one way out: sell your daughter to the king. It wasn't just about sex. For Ferdinand, every act was about power, control over bodies, minds, and entire families. He turned desire into a currency, and Spain became a nation drowning in humiliation. But while the palace filled with whispers, the country outside its walls was falling apart. The Spanish Empire, once a dominant global force, was crumbling. Across Latin America, colonies were declaring independence. One by one, Spain's overseas territories broke free. And back home, the economy was collapsing. Poverty spread. People were starving. Spain, which had once ruled vast stretches of the world, was now seen by Europe as backwards, corrupt, and broken. But Ferdinand didn't care. While his kingdom burned, he indulged himself in darker and darker fantasies. Surrounded by sycophants and enablers, he had no one to challenge him, no one to say no. He ruled like a medieval tyrant in the 19th century, immune to reason, addicted to cruelty, blind to everything except his next conquest. In 1829, at 45 years old, Ferdinand made one final push to secure his legacy. He married again for the fourth time. His new bride was Maria Cristina of Bourbon, Two Sicilies, a 23-year-old princess sent from Naples. This marriage wasn't for pleasure, it was strategic. Ferdinand was desperate for a male heir. After all his years of abuse and indulgence, the Spanish crown still lacked a clear successor. But by then, time had caught up with him. Ferdinand's health was in ruins. The syphilis he had contracted years earlier had taken hold. It wasn't just affecting his body anymore, it was attacking his brain. His moods swung violently. His judgment became erratic. He was in constant pain, plagued by ulcers and infections. His breath reeked of rot. His mind was fading. Still he clung to power. Maria Christina, to her credit, survived her marriage to him, but only because he was too sick to hurt her the way he had his previous wives. By their wedding day, Ferdinand had become a shadow of the tyrant he once was too weak to act, too proud to admit it. The last few years of his life were filled with decay, both physical and moral. He became reclusive, hidden away from public view. Those who visited him described a man who was no longer human, a diseased figure wrapped in soiled linens, moaning from the constant pain. The once feared king now stank of infection and despair. Even his doctors avoided him when they could. They came only out of duty, covering their noses, trying not to gag from the smell. His courtiers, once so eager to serve him, now kept their distance. His mistresses had fled. His enemies were gone. Even his allies had lost interest. In the end, Ferdinand was truly alone. September 1833. As the summer faded and the air turned cool, whispers echoed through the palace. The king was finally dying. He lay in his bed, unable to move. His once grand chamber was silent, save for the sound of labored breathing. Those who dared approach him found a man reduced to a skeleton covered in sores, his eyes clouded, his mind half gone. There were no priests rushing to comfort him, no grieving nobles holding his hand. The great monarch who once controlled the fates of thousands now lay abandoned, rotting away in the same palace he had turned into a brothel. On the night of September 29th it ended. King Ferdinand VII of Spain was dead. But his death brought no mourning. No solemn bells rang across the nation. No genuine tears were shed. Instead, it was relief, pure, unfiltered relief. Spain was finally free of the man who had brought it so low. The funeral was formal but hollow. Behind the rituals and public pageantry, people whispered the truth. This was a man who had disgraced the crown, betrayed the church, and ruined the country. His legacy was filth. His memory shame. The crown passed to his only legitimate child, a daughter, Queen Isabel II. She was just a child when she inherited the throne, a girl born into a storm of political instability, national decay, and a legacy of horror. She didn't just inherit a kingdom, she inherited a wreckage. And the stain left by her father's rule would haunt her reign for years to come. Ferdinand's reign was not marked by glory, reform, or vision. It was marked by obsession, exploitation, and cruelty. He had taken a powerful nation and stripped it of dignity. He had turned women into toys, religion into a weapon, and governance into a sick joke. In just 2 decades, Spain went from a proud empire to a fragmented, forgotten shell of itself. Not because of war, not because of revolution, but because one man given unchecked power chose to destroy everything in pursuit of his own desires. This wasn't just bad leadership. It was wrought from the top down. Today, nearly 2 centuries later, historians don't argue over Ferdinand's legacy. There's no debate, no romantic myth to protect. He's remembered not as a ruler, not as a father, but as a predator, a symbol of how absolute power, when placed in the hands of a broken man, can destroy a country from the inside out. His story isn't one of politics, it's a cautionary tale, a warning etched into the pages of European history. That even kings, especially kings, are not immune to the consequences of a life built on cruelty.